Russian regime in all its forms has proven multiple times that one thing it's good at is spreading disinformation and rewriting history. Due to foreign journalists who spent years covering the situation on the ground in Ukraine, Russian disinformation can be easily debunked despite billions of dollars spent every year by Kremlin on brainwashing the Western society. And our today's guest, Dylan Burns, is one of those people who defend freedom on the informational battleground.
My name is Dylan Burns. I am a streamer and conflict journalist from the United States, specifically the best state, Maryland. And I like to make documentaries. I embed with the armed forces. I've embedded with air defense crews, artillery crews, tank crews, mortar crews, to territorial defense, mechanized brigades, assault crews. I just released about 10 days ago a video on my main channel where I embedded with Squall, which are a unit of convict soldiers. These are convicted men who were sent to the prison system in Ukraine and signed contracts to join the military. It was very interesting in bed. I got a lot of great interviews, and I just like to publish those interviews, publish the daily work that many of these soldiers deal with, and try to give people an on-the-ground perspective of that life. And I stream on weekdays, telling people about my terrible, terrible opinions.
You work in Ukraine for many years already, I would say, and you have seen a lot of events and situation here on the ground. But as a journalist, what were your most shocking discoveries about the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
My most shocking discoveries. I think this whole war is very blatant. When things happen, it's not under the cover of shadowy figures or done in the shadows. While I'll see for example, in other wars afterwards, and this is true of this government too, there'll be denials and such, but there are not a lot of armed forces that would allow the military official channels to release videos of their attacks on civilians and then put music over it. On the personal social media channels of an individual soldier, maybe. I mean, that happened a decent amount in Syria. But when I see fundraising off of these videos, I remember when I was in Kherson for the first time. This was right after the Novakhovka Dam exploded. Floodwaters rushed into local homes. The disabled and the elderly who were not able to get out in time drowned in their homes because they couldn't get out and there was nobody to help them. There were some rescue crews that tried to help them, but within 48 hours of those operations starting, the city was getting bombed again. The chief rabbi of Ukraine got bombed. I know many aid workers that got bombed. I saw homeless people who got bombed on the street and, didn't have really many people to take care of them. They were walking around with open wounds. And I remember personally being embedded with an aid group that was going to go on the water to try to help lives that were in danger, people that could be drowning, and going to check to see if maybe some animals were still alive at certain locations, because when everything hits the fan, people run. And maybe the dog that's kind of your dog, it's like half stray, half your dog, they don't have enough time to get them out, so they go out to get them out. And my friend John Jones, as we're pulling back on the water and we're getting out of the boat, mortar fire starts. He gets hit in the stomach. He's an elderly British expat. They have to drag him away. We all take cover. And the next day, I'm talking to my friends about, how are we going to present this footage? How are we going to prove this? How are we going to prove that? How are we going to show that this wasn't the Ukrainians doing it, as the Russians are probably going to claim? Or how do we prove where the trajectory comes from? Or how can we prove the culprit? And then the next day, as we're visiting him in the hospital, the Russians release a video of them bombing us with the music sounding like "We're the gods of war," like it was this dreadful music video. And I didn't really have to do much Sherlock Holmes investigating. And so when I say it's blatant, that's what I mean. It's in a lot of other wars, the war crimes will happen, but no one would be bold enough to film it and not only like save it, but post it, and not only post it, but post it on official channels. It's all those things stacked on top of each other that baffle me.
What is the reason, in your opinion, for this complete disregard or disrespect towards the human life that Russians keep showing over and over again?
I mean, I think it's a few things. Part of it is definitely, and I don't want to give too much credit to this. It's definitely the propaganda. When you go and watch Russian state TV, and I don't recommend it, but if you want to understand what Russians are hearing about the war, you don't go to Russia Today. You do not go to English speaking publications. You go to publications that speak Russian. There are a few people, if you don't want to go and learn the Russian language and go check it out yourself, there are a few people that can do it for you. I know Steve Rosenberg, he usually releases a report every few days along with the BBC, uh, covering Russian newspaper headlines and what they talk about in the state press. And I know Julia Davis does a lot of translating of Russian state TV and propaganda. And you'll hear calls for the complete flattening of cities. You'll hear commentary that, well, don't worry about it. All of the good Ukrainians have left, all the ones that were with us. So all the ones that are left, how much do we really need to be concerned about this? Tons of dehumanization, tons of denial of the existence of Ukraine as an entity, and a lot of equivocation with the worst monsters and worst demons of Russia's imagination. And that doesn't just mean the typical modern kind of bigotries of, oh, look, they're all gay and trans, and then you'll go listen to the senator they appointed in occupied Zaporizhia saying, oh, they're black, and Lloyd Austin, and you'll see those posts. And my goodness. But we're also going to talk, they also talk about just the type of dehumanization of comparing them to the worst monsters of Russia's past, i.e., Nazis. If everybody that you're fighting is a Nazi, then how are you going to treat them? If everybody you're fighting is a Nazi that is going to destroy you and is also infecting your country and making it gay, and you're awarding the people who committed the worst atrocities, like what happened at Bakhmut with state awards and official recognition and putting them right next to the president at all of these rallies, at all these marches, that is going to produce a type of military culture that will breed violence. And I don't mean just the normal violence of warfare, but violence that crosses the lines of international law, whether that be all of the POW executions that we're seeing, including getting audio recently that was published by CNN, getting the audio of the order to execute. So not just all of the footage of all these POW executions we've been getting, but now the order to execute. So I think it's the military culture uh, bred by the Russian state press. I also think it's what they've allowed to fester. When Rusich releases a guide on how to properly execute somebody without getting caught, without leaving burn marks, without leaving certain marks. So when they send the body back, they don't go down and crack down on Rusich. When Rusich fighters admit to the worst of the worst atrocities, they don't go down and crack down on that. They'll crack down on looting. They'll crack down on different displays of a lack of respect for order because they don't want to see a breakdown of hierarchy in the armed forces, and sometimes that will overlap with humanitarian concerns. But there's no crackdown on the worst of the worst. That's not to say that there isn't a Russian that'll see a babushka and won't shoot them. And a lot of times when it comes to whether you survived or not in Pokrovsk as a civilian walking on the street, a lot of times it depend upon the personal morality of whatever drone pilot is flying around. And that is a scary thought.
Absolutely. Can you talk a bit more about your trips to the front lines? Where have you been so far besides Kherson?
I've been to the front in Sumy. I've been to the front in Kharkiv. I've been to the front in Luhansk. I've been to the front in the Donetsk region. I've been to the front in Zaporizhia. Um, I've been to the front on everywhere where there is basically an active physical front line. I haven't been to Odessa. I've not been to the Odessa theater. I still need to go. I'm waiting for another invite.
I know that in Kherson specifically, you have faced something that can only be described as human safari. Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Sure. So it's typically described as the human safari. I've also called it a human hunting ground, but it all is generally putting across the same idea. I went down there first during the explosion of the Novikakhovka Dam. So this is a little after that. But in 2024, I just kept getting more and more reports of the human safari, of hearing instances that isn't just like ours, but scarily like ours, with people, aid workers, or city workers, or just civilians getting hit, and then having these videos posted afterwards of their bombings with claims that they're either military, or that they're military and civilian clothing, or that they're, well, the civilians, but they're helping the armed forces, and just like a variation of just justification as to why this person who just looks like an old man is exploding on somebody's iPhone. And so I wanted to go back down there and check that out. And so I did, to film a documentary on it, on this, about this human safari. And I have so much testimony of people being hunted, of people who were just walking down the street, having to take cover, people in the market being bombed while they were buying watermelons and coffee. People who were just walking to, get medical help, get medicines, and coming back from, medical assistance, seeing medical professionals, them getting bombed, people trimming raspberry bushes, uh, tons of medical workers. I mean, I went into this warehouse, and I can't say where it is, obviously, but I went into this warehouse that had all of these bombed out ambulances, and there were so many. I expected to see one or two, but there was enough to like fill up a garage easily. And there's only been more bombings of these ambulances since I've been there. There's been bombings of fire department staff. There's been bombings of garbage truck crews, and the really horrible wounding of garbage truck crews. And so, from my time there, the implication that I've gotten is that the Russians are hunting just about anything that moves in the city, and they justify it however they want after. That isn't to say they literally hunt everything that moves on the city, but if there is a type of life in the city, it isn't safe from being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it.
That is absolutely horrible. Do you know a lot of international media or maybe international observers who talk about it?
No. My fixer, he helped Human Rights Watch write a report getting like testimony and stuff. So I know that there's investigations happening. It's not that I think that this is literally going to be lost to the history books, but I am of the dreadful feeling that we are in a place where it won't be lost in history books. Ukrainian children will be able to read about how their grandmother got hunted by drones, but we might be getting a delayed reaction where, since there's a change in the perspective of leadership in a certain capital, uh, action on this is being undercut instead of reinforced or supported. With, I mean, the recent meeting of the G7 countries, we saw the result of that. There could be no condemnation of the Russians. We didn't want to say that the war is illegal. If you can't even say the war is illegal, how are you going to get down to the specifics of some grandma getting hunted in her backyard? If you can't get the broad strokes, if you can't identify the forest, you're not going to start telling me if it's a birch tree or a pine tree.
I ask this question to all of my guests. What is the biggest misconception about the war in Ukraine that you can see people repeating over and over again?
The Russian language stuff still kills me, because my first embed on the front, I got slapped across the face when it came to the language stuff. Not literally speaking, but like my mind readjusted because I heard something from the press. I heard something online. I come here and, hey, did you know that Azov actually is mostly a Russian speaking organization based in Mariupol? Hey, look, I'm here on the Zaporizhia front. I don't hear a lick of Ukrainian. I don't hear Dobre. I know that's not what I hear here. But these are all people who are joining with, basically at the time, local militias. You can put uniforms on it, but that's, under the, federal umbrella is local militias, people defending their homes, defending their backyards, and they're speaking Russian, and they're still wanting to fight the Russians. And so I don't disregard the fact that there are people who want to be part of Russia. There are waiters. There are a minority of these people, a slim minority, but a minority of these people. These people exist. But to equivocate that radical minority position with the large swath of people from Donetsk and Luhansk and Kharkiv and from Mariupol and from the south of the country and even from some parts of the middle of the country that speak the Russian language but are Ukrainian and are part of Ukraine is ridiculous. It's to go to an Irish person and say, "Oh, you speak English. I had no clue that you were from London. You're British, are you?" That's not going to end well for you.
Absolutely. Dylan, do you often meet people from the United States who don't approve or don't understand what you do in Ukraine?
I meet some people who don't agree with what I believe, but I don't really meet anybody who doesn't don't approve of the filming, approve of what I do here when it comes to like meeting people and looking them in the face and shaking their hand. There's people on the internet that'll say things like, why don't you cover XYZ issue? Why are you covering this war instead of that war? Because that war is more important to me. But there's only so much I can do. And of course, there's like individualistic, like content creator to content creator critiques, but that's very different than meeting an actual person and shaking their hand instead of just a face on a screen.
What, in your opinion, people and specifically Americans should know about Ukraine?
I think that there's a few things they should know. I think the first thing that they should know is that the Ukrainians are not in the business of selling out territory if that selling out of territory is going to lead to the same treatment that the Russians have doled out to other occupied territories or to the people who are not even occupied right now. When we describe what's going on in Kherson, and then you hear what the Russians are demanding in their terms. They're demanding that that city where this human safari is going on, that's theirs. So what we would be doing, and this is how I put it, other people can phrase it however they want, but to me, that's handing the hunted to the hunter. And if you care about those people, I don't believe that that is the best long term outcome for them. Now, that's not to say that the continuation of the war is good for them. That's not to say that continuation of fighting is good for them. Ultimately, I want them to have a peaceful life as soon as possible. But if the troops across the river are hunting them and doing these things to them from across the river, once they have that territory, maybe they'll stop hunting with drones, but what other treatment will they get? And that is what Ukrainians are thinking, despite what anyone else might think of that. And so, if Ukrainians are thinking that they're not going to sign away that land, so the Russian starting demands are just not going to ever be conceived of by the vast majority of Ukrainian population. The polling that I've seen is that Ukrainians are divided even about giving up territory like Crimea. And that's territory that has been illegally taken back in 2014. Now you're talking about giving land to the Russians that was retaken through battle. It's just something that's a non starter. And so I would think that if you're an American, you need to figure out a situation where that non-starter is no longer a non-starter, i.e., you need to change the terms of the conditions on the field so that the Russians feel, okay, we can't make that demand anymore. Or that the certain party, since we're not going to play the blame game here in the United States anymore, we can't say who's who. A certain party can't make demands such as give us the four territories of yours. So if you think maybe if Ukraine's going to demand Belgrade, maybe I'm talking about them, but I have yet to see that.
Would you agree that the main reason, for example, United States citizens don't understand Ukrainians is because they don't have this experience that Ukrainians have?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're an American, the last time a nation has really attacked you was Pearl Harbor. And that was separated from the continental United States. That was in Hawaii. The recent attack on America, most people can think of as 9/11, with that feeling of being attacked. But that was one day and it was a horrible day. But the Ukrainians have had many, 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 many days of this constant attack because it's the nation state right next to them. After 9/11, the feeling was, hey, we got to go find where these guys are, and wherever they are, we got to get them. That's the different feeling because in Ukraine's case, it's, oh, they're right above me. Oh, they're on the street. Oh, they're there. So it is a constant and extending tragedy. It is something that continues to perpetuate. And that is something that Americans haven't had a modern experience with as only as going as far back to the Civil War. And if you go back to the Civil War and you study the Civil War and you read about the brutality of it and the type of destructions to homes, maybe you'll get some idea. But that, again, we're talking about a war that's over, 150 years old, this for men long dead. And trying to compare that to a war with drones and modern technology. It's very distant. It's very distant for many Americans because we're separated by these oceans and we have so many geographic benefits that I think that uh, the only way that Americans can really conceive of this is by getting down and getting in the dirt themselves, or doing their best to try to inform for themselves from the perspectives of those who are in the dirt.
What would you say to American citizens who believe that peace can be negotiated with Russian terrorists at this stage?
At this stage, it's not that you can't negotiate with Russia. It's a question of how do you get off the train? How do you get off the this roller coaster? You can negotiate with Russia at this stage. You can negotiate all day. You can negotiate all night. You can negotiate in a tree. You can negotiate next to bees. You can negotiate wherever. It doesn't matter, because it's a question of how do you end negotiation with a peaceful settlement. And the Russian terms are non-starters. So you can talk about non-starters all you want. I can talk about all day. I'm selling this Lada for $1 million, and I can go all around town and continue to make that demand, and I can continue to negotiate. It's now $9 million. If I keep throwing that out there, it's never going to get anywhere. So yes, you can negotiate with the Russians, but those non-starter demands are already the first problem, let alone the fact that they won't agree to a ceasefire, which would be a much better foundation for actual negotiations, because people could see, okay, there's an interest in both sides to maintain peace or maintain a ceasing of the fire, because hey, they've stopped, we've stopped. It shows that we both are looking towards trying to get towards the end of this, right? It creates an environment that's better suited for negotiating. The Russians won't agree to that, even when told by Donald Trump, the leader in the West is probably most favorable toward them outside of Orban. They go to Donald Trump to get these terms, reject it, and just keep going. They keep going, no ceasefire. So, no consideration of ceasefire, non starter terms, and the escalation of drone attacks, the escalation of attacks on the fronts, the obvious preparation for summer offensives. Everything is pointing in one direction. I'm not saying that a miracle can't happen, you know, short, Prigozhin crawls out of the grave and takes power. I don't know. But all signs point towards the war continuing through the summer and the Russians trying to take locations like Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, and trying to complete their conquests. And so I do not think that the Russians want peace right now. I think negotiation is likely being used as a tool to either continue to keep off Western support from Donald Trump and gang, or in order to try to save face. I really think those are the probably two main motivations. Maybe he sees it as a possible escape hatch, but you got to make him want the escape hatch first.
That's a very interesting topic, by the way, because, for example, American president keeps repeating that Putin wants peace, honestly wants peace, and he has this understanding with the Russian dictator. Do you think this is the case? Do you think that Putin really wants peace, or is just a misconception?
I mean, I think he would like the war's political consequences to be over. I think he would like the economic consequences to be over. I think he'd like his economic isolation to be over. I think that he would like the demographic impacts on his country's future and the legacy that he leaves to be over. I think these are all things that he wants. But do I think that it equals him wanting an end to the violence? If he could sit back and just lob rockets endlessly at Ukraine, I think he would. But I think that some of the negative impacts of the war do give him some incentives to want it over, but he's not taking the behaviors of somebody who's registered those consequences. Like when I go out and I drink a lot, if I ever do, and then the next day I'm hungover, you could say, well, okay, now I don't feel like drinking. But if I do it again the next weekend, it's like, okay, well, maybe I registered that disincentive. I just don't care enough. Right. So the question is making him care enough to stop invading, to stop bombing, and to stop killing. At least that would be my idea.
What should happen, or what should be done, so to say, in order to make Russians go home?
I think they I think they just need directions, don't they? Maybe they haven't figured out Google Maps. They got lost, wandered in. Uh you have to make it so that the machine under them just doesn't function. It's not like all the Russians who have signed up are such deep-seated patriots that if they stopped getting ammunition, if they stopped getting fuel, if they stopped getting everything that's necessary to fight, they would keep fighting. And that's not to say that everybody is getting everything that's necessary to fight. Uh, Always getting clean, filtered water in all parts of the front, that has been a problem. Always getting a constant flow of ammunition has been a problem, especially as these drones have continued to target logistics and the support vans that are always like bringing around supplies and such. And so if you make the machine under them not function due to economic travesty, catastrophe or economic problems, as well as undercutting the machine beneath them, it's not even a question of you having to put every man in the grave. I think some men will just go AWOL. In fact, we've actually gotten reports that the Russians have lost tens of thousands of men to desertion. And I think that honestly, when you're dealing with so many people, that is a quicker way to destroy an army. And maybe I'm saying this from American experience because most of Saddam's men did not fight to the bitter end. But I do think that every single Russian is not going to be killed. A lot probably are, a lot of Ukrainians are, a lot of people are going to die. But at the end of the day, if you have no chance of success, most men aren't going to run unless made to run. And I think the Russians are making some run, but they can't make them all run.
What should Ukrainians, in your opinion, know about the United States?
You need to know that America is a far, far place away from Ukraine, and it has a lot of issues that make them very anxious about their country's future and very anxious for a solution. And a lot of people come around and offer them solutions, and those solutions that they want them to be easy. I'm sure at different periods in Ukraine's history, hey, the Soviet Union collapsed. Okay, we want a new country now. What's the easy solution? A lot of people offered easy solutions, I'm sure. And one of those easy solutions has been, well, if we just stop sending aid to Ukraine, we'll have enough, support for XYZ. If we just stop all this aid to foreigners, if we just do XYZ, then everything will be solved. And some people grasp onto that because they want that easy solution for tough problems, whether it has to be drug addiction, homelessness, high housing prices, inflation, the difficulty with getting healthcare in the United States, or any of these issues. And so I just want to say that Americans, many of them are not reacting or behaving this way because they have literally looked at Ukraine's history and they've said, we looked at the hetman and we decided that he was morally repulsive. No, it's because they hear that it's just another country taking advantage of them, uh, amongst many other people taking advantage of them. I mean, I just want to say that don't take the drippings from the ramblings of con men seriously in considerations about your country. If you put more truth out there, I think it will be more powerful than any amount of propaganda or hearsay that could be put out about your country.
From Sumy to Kharkiv, from Pokrovsk to Kherson, hundreds of international journalists like Dylan Burns deliver the truth to the international society, often risking their lives to make sure that Russian crimes against humanity are not forgotten. Because the truth about Ukraine is worth fighting for just as much as fighting for its freedom. My name is Operator Starsky. Thanks for watching.